Welcome to the Women of Ambition podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Calder-Hume. The Women of Ambition podcast is a place where we explore women's ambition, first, the radical act of acknowledging it within ourselves, second, allowing space to explore what ambition means to each of us, and third, harnessing and developing our drive. So today, we're going to be looking at main character energy. Main character energy is the vibe that you might get when you're reading a book and you're learning about the protagonist of the story. The protagonist is going to be the main character. It's the person who is changing and developing over time. It doesn't necessarily have to be a person in a book. It can be metaphorical. But it is the main character in the story who is going to grow and develop over time, as opposed to a static character. Static characters are people in the stories who don't change over time. They are kind of boring. They don't have a lot of depth. And they might serve a purpose in progressing the story along, but they themselves as characters do not change and grow at the same rate as the protagonist. As women of ambition, as we come to accept and acknowledge the part of ourselves that requires growth and achievement and striving, I think accepting the fact that we are our own main characters of our story is so important. As women, it is very easy, at least in my experience, to live for other people, to live for other relationships, to live for the comfort of others. But when I do that, I abandon myself. And when I pause and I think, what is the story of my life? It's really helpful to pause and consider, am I the main character of my story? Am I growing and changing and developing? Is there some kind of a progression arc in the story of my life where I am getting somewhere that is meaningful to me? Because sometimes I find that I'm being too passive in my life. I'm being acted upon. I might be telling a story to myself that I am prevented from achieving my dreams. And I find that that puts me in a place of stagnation that's very static. And then I'm living for the dreams of other people and helping them achieve, whether it's my children or my husband or my friends or my family. Those aren't bad things to be supporting characters in other people's story. But doing that at the expense of my own growth and of my own character development is not something that I am willing to do. We've spent the last month hearing how different ambitious women set goals. One thing that I've loved from hearing these women talk is the stories that they tell, the story of their life, the story of their development, the story of them taking ownership over their life and deciding to live it for themselves. Shay told a story about going to college and getting a master's degree. I think she said it was in marketing, something that she was not interested at all, and actually realizing that she was achieving and setting big goals and accomplishing them, but doing it for somebody else. She was doing it for the approval of her mother. And how realizing that set her on a completely different trajectory, where she was living based in her own authenticity and from a place of her own choice. That is living in main character energy. Elle told the story of living a very busy, very successful life, going to school, getting a PhD, creating a business, being very successful according to outside standards, but feeling completely burned out on the inside. She decided she wanted more and decided to create a life from scratch that worked for her. She left behind friends and family and possessions, sold it all to go and create the life that was authentically hers. Talk about a story arc. These are not women who are bystanders in life. These are women who are acting and choosing and moving their story forward for themselves. So when I think about these stories and I think about my own, I remember several years ago considering my life from the place of my death and what I wanted to have contributed to the world. What did I want to teach my children? What experiences did I want to have? What story was going to be told about me to my descendants and to the world? You can do this in a very concrete way and go ahead and write out your own obituary, or just think about the kind of impact that you want to have on the world. The most important part is the question that I asked myself, and the question that I hope each of us ask ourselves. And that is, am I the main character in my own story? Being your own main character is not selfish. It does not take away from the stories of other people. But when you're telling the story of your life, it needs to be your story. And if you're living for other people and other people's dreams and other people's experiences, you're a supporting character. And that's not what I want for you. That's not what is going to fulfill a woman of ambition, to be a supporting character in someone else's story. Now, we all are to a certain degree, but when we're telling the story of our life, we are the alpha character. We are not the beta character. We are the one that is growing and changing. And maybe right now in your story, we're still in the beginning. We're still in the opening credits. Or maybe you're at the crux of a personal identity crisis. This is the rising action piece where the main character realizes discontent, realizes there needs to be a change made, has all these feelings and emotions, and it all spikes up to this moment until a change happens and this character reaches a new level of functioning in the world. Maybe that's where you're at. Maybe you're on the rise to that next level. What I don't want for anybody, especially for women of ambition, I do not want you stuck in the beginning phase, in the first few chapters of your story, because you never got to the place where you wanted to be. And that's where stretching and growth and goals and understanding your values will help you get to that next place, to start living in your authenticity, to start having the friendships and the relationships and the life and the career and the education and the understanding and place in the world that is going to be your story, the mark that you're going to leave on the world. Choosing to create a life completely from scratch based on your own terms does not happen in a vacuum. It comes after making commitments to yourself, keeping promises over and over and over again, and choosing yourself over and over and over again. And that's the kind of relationship with self that I see in the ambitious women in my life, the ones that are living authentically into themselves. That's what I want to talk about moving forward. We're going to look at relationships. Our first interview is going to be with a beautiful human, Tiffany Kane, who's going to talk about the relationship with self that she developed in her life. And that relationship with self is what drives those goals and the ambition for so many of us, to know ourselves, to know what we want, and to move forward into that space, and to respect ourselves enough to turn down what is not correct for us. Tiffany's story is incredibly powerful. It's fascinating, and I can't wait to share it next week. From there, we're going to look at lots of aspects of ambitious relationships. Ambitious relationships with self, yes, but also with friends and family, spouses and partners and children, siblings and parents. Our interview last season with Natalie Willis was fantastic, and we got a little bit into this ambitious relationships with spouses. And when you are a woman of ambition, when you value growth and depth, your relationships are going to have that reflected in them. Just like how ambition is a neutral personality trait that is reflected in all areas of our lives, it is absolutely going to be reflected in our relationships. And that can create some unique challenges and unique opportunities for growth. It's something we can bring to the table in our relationships that someone else might not be able to. And it's going to be a really interesting conversation topic to look at this side of ambition, to look at relationships, because we can be really intense. We can have high expectations. And I'm really excited to go a deep dive into that. For this next segment of the podcast, I want to come at it with the angle of main character energy. We are each the main characters of our story. What do we want to do with our lives? What do we want to learn? What kind of relationships do we want to have? And how are those stories going to play out? Taking the active role rather than passive role. Taking ownership of these different aspects of our lives and what we choose to do with them rather than playing the victim. That's not an empowering place to live. That's a really bad energy place to live. And as we come to respect ourselves and know ourselves, we can challenge ourselves more. We can set those goals. We can own these different chunks of ourselves and improve and create the life that we want to live, and hopefully bring us closer to that end story that we would really like to be able to leave behind and have be true for each of us. You are not meant to live for the comfort of other people. And when you can live in your own truth as your own main character, it doesn't make you self-centered. It allows you to see other people as the main character of their own story. And suddenly, competition isn't really a thing. Because how can you compete with another main character in their own story in a totally different book? You're writing your own story. You're living it. You're in your own space. There's no scarcity mindset because you can create whatever kind of a life you want to have. You can create whatever kind of relationship serves you. You can set the goals, you can take the ownership over your story, and you can support other people along the way. And you can be their supporting characters in their story, and they can be supporting characters in your own, and you can still live authentically. So I invite you to come along with me. It's going to be awesome. I am so into this idea. I think if I ever did get a tattoo, it might be main character energy written on my arm, which is a big step for me to ever say that there's something that permanent in my life that I need to be reminded of. But I do. When I sit down and I look at my goals and my values for the week and I'm setting my expectations for myself, I remember I am the main character of my story. I'm going to support other people in being the main character of their story and let people live their lives and let me live mine. And it's a really beautiful place to be. It's a beautiful energy to live in, and I'm really excited to share that with all of you. I'm kicking off this next stint of the podcast, this focus on ambitious relationships, on Friday at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. I'm going to be chatting with Tiffany Kane, next week's guest, in an Instagram Live. Join us there at Women of Ambition Podcast on Instagram. Ask your questions. Check out Tiffany. She's fantastic. I just did a guest episode on hers last week that just got published, and that was so fun. And if you want to hear a little bit more about my story, you can listen to that episode on the Radical Audacity in Love and Life with Tiffany Kane podcast. It's episode 75, and the title is going to sound familiar. It's Destigmatizing Shame Around Women of Ambition with guest Alyssa Hume. So check that out. It is seriously the best to be immersing myself amongst other amazing, strong, healthy women. The energy, the vibration, the drive that comes from interacting with these women and creating podcasts and creating just uplifting material is fantastic. So check that out and come interact with us on Instagram and share with us how you're the main character of your story. And look forward to next week's episode. It's going to be really fantastic. Thanks so much for listening today. This is the Women of Ambition podcast, and I am your host, Alyssa Calder-Hume. Thanks so much.